again unmanned. It was the second unmanned launch of the Saturn V rocket. So then we had Apollo 7 from this pad, and that was, what was that? Oh. That was the last time astronauts have launched from Cape Canaveral. Okay, October 1968. Now, that's going to change probably later this year. Okay? Because NASA has contracted with both SpaceX and Boeing to build new crew capsules to get our astronauts up to the space station. Those launches should start later this year. SpaceX is going to launch from Kennedy Space Center time, but Boeing is going to launch from Launch Pad 41 right here on Cape Canaveral. So that's going to be pretty exciting. So after Apollo 7, of course, all the rest of the Apollo missions all took place over on the Kennedy Space Center side. Apollo 8, of course, was our first manned trip to the moon. That was noted for the astronauts orbited the moon. Christmas Eve, they sent back that very moving photograph of the lunar landscape with the Earth rising in the background. Okay, that was Apollo 8. Apollo 9 was just an Earth orbiting mission. It's where they practiced getting into the lunar module, transferring, flying the lunar module a little bit, practicing moving it around. Apollo 10 did the same thing as Apollo 9, except in lunar orbit. Apollo 10 did everything except land on the moon. Okay, it practiced all the other things except landing and taking off. Of course, then you had Apollo 11. Well, we know about Neil Armstrong. We know about Buzz Aldrin. Anybody remember the third person on that mission? Yeah, we always want to give Michael Collins some love. He's the one people tend to forget. Apollo 12 was noted for what happened within 1 minute after launch. Okay? It was an overcast day when they launched. That Saturn V lifted off, and within the first minute, it was struck twice by lightning. The lightning knocked out the onboard computer systems. Okay? Well, you all, I'm sure, have had problems with your computers before. If you've ever had to call tech support or the help desk, what's one thing they almost always ask you to do? Reboot, right? That's essentially what they did with those computers. They came back fine, and it ended up being a very successful mission. Well, then, of course, we had Apollo 13. I think everybody knows about that. That's the one with the famous astronaut, Tom Hanks. So I want to leave some time for questions. I mean, you've gotten a lot of information today. We are now heading back towards the visitor complex. We should be back there probably in about 15 minutes. So if you didn't have it answered yet, what questions do you have?
Why are they waiting 500 years for the time capsule?
Why are they waiting 500 years? It does seem kind of an arbitrary time period, doesn't it? I don't know the answer to that. I know some capsules are like 50 years or 100 years. And who are we to say if 100 years from now somebody decides we're not going to wait the 500 years, we're going to open it now? Is anybody here going to stop them? I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, exactly. I think it's probably arbitrary, but they just chose that number.
Which launch pad did Louis Armstrong and Buzz Lightyear go from? Sorry.
I had that. One day I was doing one of our Explore tours, and I asked, "Okay, who was the first person to set foot on the moon?" And it had to be like 9 or 10 years old. Louis Armstrong! I said, okay. Okay. Another one of my favorites was on that tour, we drive by what's called the Operations and Checkout building. I'll actually point it out when we go by it, going back here in just a second. And that building is used when the astronauts come here from Houston, usually about a week before launch. I said, we keep them in quarantine in that building. And I said, well, why do you think we quarantine the astronauts before a launch? And of course the answer is so they don't get sick in space. But there's, again, another kid, probably 6 or 7 years, and said, old, he said, so they don't run away. That's favorite answer to that question. So we are now back on the Kennedy Space Center. You can take all the pictures you want now from the bus on our way back. You get another look over here at pad 37. We were just there, had a good look at it. Going to the left from there, you see the 4 lightning towers that are on pad 40. And as I mentioned, SpaceX is using that pad today. But we had some significant, we had one launch in particular I want to mention. How many of you remember the Cassini mission?
Yep.
Right, Cassini that took the probe to Saturn and spent a number of years orbiting Saturn and checking out Saturn's moons. Well, it launched from pad 40 over there. Then next to that, to the left, you see the white tower. It's about to go behind the big gray building. That's launch pad 41 right next to that. We had a number of significant deep space missions that launched from there. If any of you remember the Voyager probes, okay, Voyager 1 and 2 that explored the outer solar system, they launched from pad 41. The Viking Mars landers that landed on Mars in the mid-70s. New Horizons, that was the probe that flew by Pluto about 4.5 years ago. And Curiosity, the Mars rover Curiosity, that is still working on Mars. It's in its 8th year working on Mars. Those all launched from launch pad 41 over there. We've had a number of significant launches from these launch pads. So what other questions do you have? Is everybody kind of blown out at this point? Is that brain dead? TMI, too much information?
How many acres does this station have? Cape Canaveral Station?
I don't know about Cape Canaveral. The Kennedy Space Center is about 140,000 acres. It's about 220 square miles. Kurt, do you know the acreage on Cape Canaveral?
You've given me my home.
Yeah, me too. It's less than the Kennedy Space Center. I know that, but how much less I don't know. So this is all the Banana River. This is what really separates Cape Canaveral, which is behind us, from Kennedy Space Center, which is now ahead of us. Yeah.
Has the Space Center ever taken a direct hit from a hurricane?
Not a direct hit in terms of like, has the eye ever